Tollymore, A Place to Ponder and Pray by Peter Hoover. Chapter 4. Not an easy story to tell. God hears earnest prayers, sometimes in very strange ways. Far away, on the exact opposite corner of Tasmania, others began to pray for Edwin, just as earnestly, and sadly, also with the same lack of experience. Nearly a month after Edwin had left on his ill-fated business trip, his parents, Mum in particular, felt frantic. What happened? She kept repeating to no one in particular. What on earth could have happened with Edwin? Not even a chance he would have run away. Not our Edwin. No, Mum, Dad, equally worried, dark circles around his eyes, said. Edwin would not have run away, but someone may have harmed him. We live in Van Diemen's Land. Uncle John Margetts first caught wind of what had taken place. With his son Stephen checking out cattle at Wynyard on the mouth of the Inglis, he heard from the postman that Edwin had suffered arrest and the police had sent him to Hobart Town. Oh, not Hobart Town! Mum threw her apron over her face. Dad looked worse than ever. It did not help that another neighbour, Bill Moore, a sawyer, told the family that such happenings had become startlingly familiar in the British colonies of Australia. What they do, Bill Moore explained, is to nab any hale and healthy young men to become slaves in the massive and corrupt penal system. They trump up any small offence and sentence them to 5 or 10 years of forced labour. The Blackwells listened in horror. They use those young men, neighbour Bill continued, to build roads and bridges and all manner of construction. Did you ever notice all those beautiful and ornate stone buildings throughout colonial towns? All those perfectly formed stones? Can you guess who cut them? Convicts. Our whole society, here in Van Diemen's Land, or Tasmania as we now call it, is built on forced labour. Do you think Edwin needs to work in a chain gang? Tommy asked in a small voice. Not necessarily, Bill said. They don't chain the guys together unless they have tried to run away. And then, of course, their work in construction gets cumbersome. Sleepless nights, tears and prayers followed. But in spite of the tragedy that befell the Blackwells, life needed to move on. And thankfully, some of the friends the family had already made in Tasmania now did what they could to help. One of them, a lawyer, a politician, later knighted by King Edward VII for being a father of Australian Federation, Sir A.D. Douglas, became personally interested in Edwin's fate. How did that happen? Sir A.D. Douglas, long before his knighthood and fame, grew up on the estate of a wealthy family at Thorpe in Norfolkshire, England. His father served the king as a general in the army, and his grandfather had become a British admiral during the Napoleonic Wars. In spite of this illustrious background, young A.D. liked nothing more than playing cricket. He became a champion cricketer during his years as a student, both in England and France. Then, bored with European life, he chose adventure in the British colonies down under, and in this case, Van Diemen's Land. 15 years before Edwin's dad and his brother George came to Newry in Van Diemen's Land, A.D. Douglas had already firmly established himself in the neighbourhood as a lawyer and a gentleman farmer. It was lawyer Douglas's farm that Tommy and Edwin had first cut grain and sheared sheep. Edwin had spent an enjoyable evening swimming in the Esk with lawyer Douglas's hired hands, and naturally, when this lawyer learnt of Edwin's plight in Hobart, he roused himself to action. Not only a lawyer, but also the Lord Mayor of Launceston and a minister of the Tasmanian Parliament, lawyer Douglas seized on Edward's plight as his personal project of redemption. His own statement against all the wretchedness and unfair treatment British subjects had suffered so long under Australia's penal system. No young man will ever survive with his morals intact, he declared passionately, while living and working month after month, year after year, amongst nothing other than the degrading and corrupt influence of seasoned criminals, such as the ones at Hobart Town. No one could argue his case. "What is more," he declared, "I will personally arrange to have a juvenile delinquent, a 15-year-old of my jurisdiction, Edwin Blackwell, to be transported to our farm, and I will see to it that he will be given a fair chance, a chance to prove himself and to choose a better way. All humans deserve it." Politicians, lawyers, men like A.D. Douglas of Launceston, he later became the Premier of Tasmania, can sway crowds and change laws. But does God even need people like that? Many times not. Lawyer Douglas's redemption came to Edwin Blackwell on a sweltering hot day in January 1867. Working on a new wharf at a place called Cygnet, south of Hobart Town, he still shared his unhappy fate with his fellow prisoners amongst intolerable hosts of sandflies that threatened to drive both man and beast mad. Briefly pausing to eat, Edwin noticed a corporal approaching him and rose in haste to face him. "Can you read?" the corporal asked him point blank. "No, sir." "Then listen." Pulling a letter from his chest pocket, the corporal explained tersely where the letter came from and what it meant. "Mr. A.D. Douglas of Launceston is asking if you should be willing to apprentice yourself to him in exchange of your criminal sentence. You could work under police supervision at one of his farms of the Longford area." The information came so abruptly, so unexpectedly, that Edwin could hardly comprehend it all. Living on one of Lawyer Douglas's farms along the Esk, dealing with stock instead of digging and building with criminals, almost anything sounded glorious. Without understanding, or perhaps even listening carefully, Edwin followed the corporal to the tent of the military command. He took the freshly dipped pen they handed him and made his X here, there, and on the next page, there. No more of Hobart. No more of what had become Edwin's 10-month horror. After several days of legal processing and transport, this time northbound up along the Midlands Road, Edwin revelled in the scenes, sights, and familiar faces of his former neighbourhood. Neither did Mum, Annie, and the rest of his family live along the Esk. As expected, Edwin never saw anything of the noble Lawyer Douglas at his farm. On arrival, his police escort left an envelope of papers with the manager, Drew Barker, who apparently lived with his wife and family at the main house on the farm. "Come with me," Drew told Edwin as the officer departed. "I think I've seen you before." "I'm sure," Edwin agreed. "I worked at the Newry mill until a year ago." "Ah, that's how it is. But coming from Hobart Town?" Edwin did not feel like explaining. At the third building out from the house, Drew stopped and explained, "You will stay here with a few hired hands. You'll help with the cooking and clean-up, and you'll do your own washing. Pat or Joe will tell you what to do in the morning." Inside the unpainted shack, Edwin took in the scene and Drew did introductions. Obviously, the lawyer's hired hands, Pat and Joe Ruffin, Colin Smith, and a boy called Ted, possibly about Edwin's age, greeted him with anything from surly indifference to outright hostility. Edwin's heart sank. How could this be any different? "You'll work with us," Pat told him grimly. "No monkey shines. I carry a gun." Edwin had already noticed. "Take off your prison togs and wear this," Drew told Edwin, somewhat kinder, and handed him a set of clothes. Not new, but normal. "Lawyer said you need to put these on." "Now?" Edwin asked. "Any time. For the moment, you'll have to share a bunk with the narrowest of these guys. Obviously Ted." Indeed, Edwin soon took stock of his new environment on Lawyer Douglas's farm. The shearing, now in full swing since the best wool comes in the fall, did not bother him. He loved to work, and learning a new trade, if anything, intrigued him. Just as he had worked on the harvest, he now worked with the sheep and the land. But there were other problems. Serious problems. Out of earshot, the third day in, Ted informed him of the danger in which he stood. "Watch out for Colin Smith," he told Edwin. "Stay clear of him. He's a bad guy." "Yeah," Edwin responded. "I've been with bad guys for almost a year. Will this be any different?" But after Ted had shared his experience on the lawyer's farm, even as a paid hired hand, Edwin knew one thing for sure. He needed to get out of here. At once. And he did. Tommy discovered it first. A moonlit night, with the moorporks calling. Ever since Edwin had gone, he had kept a gun, cocked and ready, standing beside his bed. Too many tiger cats, too many bandicoots, even the odd Tassie devil prowling around the place. But this time when he awoke with a start, he knew right away no wild animal had caused Edwin's empty bed to creak. "Who goes there?" he whispered. "Shh," a human being whispered back. "I'm here. Just stay mum until morning. No sense waking the lot." He jumped up, and whatever he all said, and whatever everyone else said that night in Blackwell cabin under the stars, cannot all be recorded. So many tears, so much joy. "But won't they catch you?" Mum needed to know. "Is it even safe for you to be here?" "Why not take for Port Phillip?" Annie wondered. "Lots of runaways have found their way up there and nothing happens." "But we don't want Edwin in Port Phillip," Mum wailed. "We want him here." By noon, with Mum and Annie's meal of the year, with smoked pork sizzling, deep-fried apple dumplings, some already tried, and much more to come, the constable also came. And the following day, the most unhappy Edwin in the British Empire found himself back on Lawyer Douglas's farm at Longford. Pat and Joe grinning, Ted looking unhappy as always, and Colin, well, Edwin never looked at his direction at all. Edwin hated what had happened. Once in a while he still tried praying, but nothing seemed to be going right. Would he really need to finish his 5-year training school sentence? By this time, not only the Blackwells, but others around them felt something had gone wrong. "Is this the best we can do for our fellow subjects in trouble?" one Irish neighbour, Alex Clark, wondered. With his wife, Fanny, Alex and his family lived almost a stone's throw from the Newry Mill. He had known the Blackwells ever since they came from England. They knew what had happened with young George, and their youngest son, Junior, had grown up with Tommy and Edwin. Shall we just let everything go and not even care? Not only was Alex Clark a successful farmer along the Esk at Newry, he was also a member of the Tasmanian Parliament, and when he began to write things publicly, everyone paid attention. 16th of May, 1868. To His Excellency, Colonel Governor Sir Thomas Gore Browne. Sir, being well assured that the merits of the case I am about to detail have not been fairly represented to you, I am emboldened to bring them under your notice, as I conceive there has been a great wrong committed under the sanction of your name, by which an honest and respectable family have been caused the deepest distress, and the future welfare of their son jeopardized. Mr. George Blackwell and wife, a worthy and industrious couple, were in my employment for some years, the former as a miller at the Newry Mill. They have a son named Edwin, who was learning his father's trade, but through some evil influence, this lad, then 15 years old, committed a petty forgery for which he was sentenced in the Supreme Court at Launceston to 12 months' imprisonment. When the boy Edwin was then discharged from jail, he very naturally found his way back to his parents, now residing at Table Cape. There he was arrested again on the complaint and information of Mr. A.D. Douglas, who charged him as a runaway apprentice, consigned by authority to his care to learn farming, and amend his morals in the men's hut on a farm where the owner was always absent. I need not point out to your Excellency that no greater perversion could be committed than to consign a youth to such a fate, without the consent, knowledge, or reference to his loving and anxious parents, who are in every way capable of promoting his best interests, and who are looking forward to his return and restoration to his family with feelings which none but parents who are yearning for the reformation of their son can estimate. I have presumed to address your Excellency with the full conviction that the facts which I have narrated could not be known to you, and that when you find them substantially correct, you will initiate such measures as may restore the lad to his sorrowing parents. I have the honour to be your Excellency's obedient servant, Alexander Clark, Government House, Hobart, Tasmania. More public discussion about Edwin's fate continued in the Launceston Examiner. Many of the settlers who knew the Blackwells, who had shared their previous grief and who admired their pioneering work in the bush, felt something had gone seriously wrong. Then George Shackleton, the Christian missionary of Tollymore on Table Cape, the very man who had buried Edwin's brother, began to share his opinion. Who was this enigmatic pastor, This Shackleton man, who had come from England to re-establish the true Church of Jesus Christ on the wild northwestern coast of Tasmania. For many of the local settlers, the little chapel George Shackleton set up at Tollymore looked, if anything, almost cute. So not what one would have expected in a pioneer settlement, half a world away. But here it sat, perched 311 feet, 95 metres, directly up from the sea, on a cliff, but not in any mountainous terrain, alongside the Tollymore Road, with its little corners and curves along gently rolling farmland. Not to be expected, but neither would one have expected George and Margaret Shackleton and their unusual family, who came to Tasmania from Dundalkin Island, as Christians. What kind of Christian, you might ask? Only Christian, insisted George Shackleton when the immigration authorities needed to know. I am Christian, a follower of Jesus Christ. I am not Roman Catholic. I am not Protestant. I do not belong to any sect. I am Christian. Lifting his one eyebrow a bit, the British official at Hobart Town signed and stamped the Shackletons' family ticket and said, "Next, please." Not only coming from Ireland with a strong faith in God, the Shackletons came prepared to spread their faith wherever needed. They came with their King James Bibles, of course, but much more unusually, they came with a complete prefabricated church building. Small, but neat and impressive. We expect to start a church here on this island, George Shackleton, not officially ordained, explained. But we will listen to what the Lord will tell us, and we will build it exactly where he wants it. More strange stares at the quay. Not exactly hostile, but just puzzled. "Anything under the sun," said the portmaster, as he gave permission to the deckhands to proceed with the unloading. The Shackletons had arrived at Hobart Town 10 years ago. The settlers at Table Cape had smiled at first and told comical stories about them. But now, while Edwin languished in the tough and ungodly environment of his training school, and when George Shackleton shared his opinion, the settlers listened and wondered. George Shackleton sent his letter to the Launceston Examiner on the 1st of June in 1868. "No longer able to refrain from giving public expression to my feelings, I solicit a place in your columns, which I find have already brought the case of Edwin Blackwell before the public. Edwin has been assigned to Mr. A.D. Douglas for 5 years as a labourer on his farm, without either his own consent or that of his parents. This worthy couple has already passed through much trouble, the oldest son having been drowned a few years ago while fording our river. Scarcely had the mother's tears been dried when, in a moment of thoughtlessness, this youth committed an act punished by 1 year's imprisonment. At the expiration of this sentence, he fully expected to return home, to resume the enjoyment of his family around him. But instead, he was ruthlessly seized again, to spend his strength and labour for the benefit of another. His father had just taken nearly 300 acres of heavily timbered land, counting on having the labour of his 2 remaining sons to clear and cultivate it. And now this means, his only means of doing so, is snatched from him. Edwin's elder brother, Thomas, is left with his spirit broken while attempting this arduous work alone. And each day he goes to work, he may cry, "My strength fails me." The bereaved parents may well feel, "We shall see his face no more. 5 years a broken heart cannot endure." And Edwin's sisters, is there no pity for them? They were a truly happy family. This is no fiction, it is reality. Is this respectable couple to give up all hopes of further clearing and farming their land, and perhaps be compelled to leave the unfinished work already begun, only for a stranger to pocket the benefits arising from the labour of this young man, now nearing 17 years of age? While we are still rejoicing with our brethren in America at the abolition of slavery and the promulgation of a law that forbids the capture of the young African from his parents and from his home to labour for others, we have the exact same injustice acted out here, right here. I ask, is this British law? I answer, no, it cannot be. Our law considers every man innocent until proven guilty. Then it punishes. But when its sentence is fulfilled, whether fine or imprisonment, the subject of it is free. But here comes in a different law, the law of Tasmania. Young Blackwell has served 1 year to satisfy England's justice, and now he must serve 5 more years to satisfy Tasmanian justice? No, he is not in chains, but under the eye of the keeper, revolver in hand, under penalty of £20 to any who should assist his escape. This with even a double sentence upon himself. It is all moonshine to send a lad to Mr. Douglas's farm to get corrected while sending him to work day after day while his only companions are of an abandoned and corrupted character. Again, sir, what right have we in a free country to use compulsion when the law has already been satisfied? I am, dear sir, yours truly, George Shackleton, Tollymore, Table Cape, Tasmania. 6 years in detention? Will I really be 21 years old, Edwin asked himself, when I finally come back to Mum and Dad to stay? The field hands, the shearers, even Drew Barker's wife, who dished out the basic supplies, noticed that Edwin no longer talked unless forced to answer. Far from what he was, the champion reaper, the boy who trotted upstairs with 2 bags of wheat, the horse racer, the most daring diver, Edwin had become a taciturn, chronically moody young man. Yes, he had grown taller, with rings under his eyes, and he walked with the shuffling gait of his fellows. Back home, life needed to continue. Dad had become quieter than ever. Tommy tried to help wherever he could, but to Mum the work seemed overpowering. She did not say it, but everyone knew what she thought. Oh, if only we had stayed at home in England. The neighbours often helped, and now in the springtime they sometimes needed help as well. Could Tommy take part in a cattle drive tomorrow? Uncle John Margetts came to ask at the end of September 1868. We need to transport stock from Wynyard to here, and the more help we get, the better. Stephen will come along, and John Ridge, and possibly even Robbie Quiggins, our Manx neighbour. He's also buying cattle. Dad assented wordlessly. Wild cattle they were. To get them across the Inglis looked challenging, all the more so because the incoming tide had begun. Leading, not chasing the cattle, seemed to work somewhat. But of course, much cantering about, excited shouts and loud cries of "Hoi, hoi!" surrounded the expedition. The cows and grown steers knew what to do with the fairly shallow Inglis tide, but the calves feared the river and kept breaking out. "I'll fix 'em," Tommy shouted. "I'll drag 'em in." With a successful swoop of his rope, its nose plopping neatly onto a wild calf's neck, he plunged into the water, the rope securely wrapped around his middle. Too bad his English saddle did not come, conveniently, with a horn like the cowboys use in America. The calf, whatever he had in mind, needed to follow. It went well until nearing the other side of the river, a bit deeper by now, where Tommy's horse briefly lost his footing and plunged to swim. Not a problem, except that Tommy's rope, wrapped around him, neatly pulled him off his mount. The calf, not such a small animal either, took the advantage and broke out, swimming, jumping and leaping back to its familiar shore. What exactly happened with Tommy? We are not sure. The water was not too deep yet, probably no higher than a horse's back. In the excitement, it seems Tommy did loosen the rope so the calf was free. Did he hit his head on his thrashing horse or saddle? We may never know. But the fact is, by the time John Ridge, Steve Margetts and Robbie Quiggins rescued him and pulled him out of the water, he was no longer breathing. All the men, British as they were, covered their eyes with their hands. The Wynyard neighbours came, along with the constable. So did the coroner, who also handled the post. Just over an hour later, Uncle John Margetts, with a borrowed team and a dray, proceeded homeward with Tommy's body wrapped in blankets on the back. The constable had given Uncle John a copy of the inquest, signed by him and the coroner. It included these words: "The said Thomas William Blackwell, on the 29th of September, in the year aforesaid, 1868, was engaged in driving a calf across the ford at the River Inglis in the county aforesaid, Wellington, and it so happened that the said Tom William Blackwell accidentally, casually, and by misfortune, fell into the aforesaid River Inglis, and in the waters thereof was there suffocated and drowned." I will not need to describe how it went when Uncle John Margetts arrived at the Springfield estate, the house of the Blackwell family, late that night. Neither can I tell you exactly how it went the following afternoon, where the Blackwells, the Margetts, the Ridges, the Deans, and a handful of other neighbours came together at Tollymore to bury Thomas Blackwell beside the small stone marker of his brother George. I was not there on that occasion, but yes, I have stood there in the rosy glow of dawn, light coming up over the sea, wondering and praying. What is life? Dad, George Blackwell Sr., born at the village of Arnsby in Leicestershire, England, immigrant to Van Diemen's Land in 1855, did not weep during Tommy's funeral service. 8 years earlier, George Shackleton, the Christian, had preached George's funeral message, and now he did it for Tommy. George had been 18. Now Tommy lacked only 1 month from his 20th birthday. Dad looked blankly at the front wall of the chapel, while Brother